Hi, this is Alise Saunders from Tales from an Untamed Soul. Today, I am in Wilson, North Carolina at the Selkie with Amanda Duncan. Amanda has overcome mental, emotional, and financial domestic abuse to open up not only one, but two businesses. I am so excited for you to hear her compelling story today. You're going to be on the edge of your seat. Amanda is currently in college. She is getting her human services degree with a focus on counseling, so that in the community of Wilson, she can begin to facilitate very difficult conversations around inequity of all kinds.
Hi, my name is Amanda Duncan. I'm the owner of Simply Adorned 79, which is a jewelry wholesale business. I wholesale across the United States. I also own The Selkie, which is a North Carolina creative gift shop in historic downtown Wilson, North Carolina.
So how did you come to teach meditation to prison inmates in conjunction with the Kadampa Buddhist Temple in Raleigh, North Carolina?
I started working with other teachers who went into the state prison system to teach a mindfulness and meditation course. And it was called and is still called the Kadampa Center Prison Project. We would go into these institutions and work with violent offenders, even juveniles, to work through an anger management book. We use 16 guidelines quite a bit to approach different ways to address your thoughts and your thought process and how to handle that well. Also incorporated into that was learning how to meditate, which you can imagine is very important in the prison system. When you meditate, you're giving yourself that space to have a more well thought out reaction to a situation. That group was pretty impressive. When I started working with them, I think there were probably about 30, either life or long-term offenders in that group. And they kind of ranged from violent crimes, rape, drug offenses, really, pedophiles, anything like that. It was just such an amazing experience where you kind of strip somebody down to their absolute humanness. You get in there and start talking to these men and realize that the uniform is just circumstantial, that there is a legitimate person under there. The reality of who these individuals are is totally different than how they're presented on television, how, socially you're brought up to think of inmates. And that was a really beautiful experience to be able to sit down and connect with somebody who society has told you is an unfavorable person to be in. And then I started working with another co-teacher who worked at C.A. Dillon Youth Development Center. That was a totally different experience. And unfortunately, I was only there for a short period of time. It was definitely more intense. Teenagers, especially teenage boys, I have two, so I can claim this as truth. They're different animals. You throw the hormones in, a lot of them had very traumatic upbringings. It's a little bit harder to get through because the defense mechanisms are there. I think they've not had the opportunity to sit down with themselves and be willing to accept a reinterpretation of how to live their life. That they definitely not at that point. I don't think any teenagers at this point. It was definitely a much more intense situation, but definitely more rewarding. There would be times really in both situations where as co-teacher, and all of the teachers really across the board, we could step back and let some of the students lead the class. You would see that moment where things would just kind of click. They were so proud of themselves that there was a difficult situation that they had to deal with, and they were able to stop and pause, take a breath, work through coping skills, work through that toolbox and handle the situation in a way that they never thought they would have been able to. That wasn't reactionary. It's funny because you don't really feel like, yay, I did my job. It's more because honestly, as a coach, I think in any kind of helping profession, you're kind of working on yourself at the same time you're kind of hoping to help other people. So it wasn't ever, that we were high-fiving each other, that we did a great job. It was just like being able to lay witness to a beautiful experience where somebody kind of felt like they were in control of their own direction. That's an amazing thing to see. Really incredible, especially with the teenagers. That was just, it was unbelievable to, and I guess I'll say this, with the teenagers, the habitual patterning of unsavory behaviors was not so well ingrained that they weren't at a point in their life where they could break those habits. And there are two in particular, and I'll talk about one of the youth. The first time he came into class, I've never been around somebody where the anger just radiated through the skin, and you could almost touch it. All of these classes were voluntary, so you were not required to go. Case managers would definitely encourage certain individuals to go. And this young man grew up in Fayetteville, and a lot of gang activity. He had watched his older brother die in front of him and watched a lot of his friends die. And I don't, they obviously can't disclose what the crime was. They're underage. But, I'm making the assumption that it was probably gang related. But he walked in, and it was very jarring to see how angry he was. And by the end of the class, he was teaching it. With the youth, you see it click, and you know it's going to stay. It's not where, even as an adult myself, I try to make behavioral changes, modify thought process. It takes a lot of work, a lot of, half steps forward and, 3 steps back, to kind of get into a new habit. And kids are much more, malleable than adults are. So that to me was probably single-handedly the most rewarding experience I might ever have, doing outside work. It's being able to see that happen and know that there are 2 young men walking around who are interested and will definitely find a way to contribute to their communities. And like I said, it was an incredible experience for me because it was the first time I had been out of my house, to do any kind of work and even volunteer work. And so I guess my personal growth from that experience is that I learned how to forgive. I learned how to look at an individual who had created a lot of harm and pain in their environment, see them for who they are, and forgive what they did to somebody that they love.
Can you share the clarity that you now have on your first marriage and the abuse that you and your children experienced?
I think there are a lot of myths about domestic abuse. Again, not in a way that people see it on television. I think there's an idea of what domestic abuse looks like to a lot of people who, watch television shows and crime shows and things like that. In the marriage that I was in, my partner was very manipulative and controlling. And even to this day, I think he has a limited understanding of just what that looked like for me. He was never physically abusive in that I got struck. And that is what a lot of people equate domestic abuse to, is that there's always this physical component. And really, in all honesty, the major aspect of domestic abuse that is the hardest to deal with is the control aspect and how that comes about. The psychological control. And then you have a financial control component where, I did not have access to money. I know he kept money to the side, that I was not aware was even there. Anytime I needed to go and do something or buy something for the children, I really had to fight to get money just to cover basic needs. It would always be amazing to me that things that you would think of as basic necessities or needs for children, clothes, and, being able to go to the dentist myself or eye doctor, things like that. That was something that was not allowed. There was not money for that. And it would, financial abuse, emotional abuse, intimidation, all of those kinds of things are really to take your value away as a person, so that you don't feel human. And so you don't fight back for the rights that you innately deserve to have. And that is really the hardest part of domestic abuse. It's kind of like looking at an iceberg. The physical abuse is just that tip that's showing up on the surface of the water. All of the really deep-seated trauma that's happening to another person is all underneath, where you can't see, and it's much more substantial, harder to deal with than what is outwardly being expressed.
After teaching meditation in the prison system with individuals who experienced a great deal of trauma, what is your understanding of the cycle of trauma?
When you are looking at somebody who's inflicting pain, when I worked in the prison system, one of the first things I learned was that for a person to be able to inflict pain, they have to be in pain themselves. And having gone through that and hearing the horror stories that some of these men went through as children, which ultimately got them, incarcerated, I realized that there's a process there. Learning that while still in my marriage and not understanding the value of that until I got out of my marriage, looking back is an incredible thing. It's really amazing that I had that opportunity to volunteer when I did, because I think the outcome of the situation would have been totally different. I was very angry leaving that marriage. I had no idea who I was. It almost feels like your soul has left your body and you are walking around just flesh and bones and not feeling your environment at all. What jarred me was hearing my older son talk to my younger son, and he sounded just like his dad. And that's what woke me up and made me angry enough. It was seeing the effect on the children that made me angry enough to get out. And I am still very angry with their father. He really doesn't fully comprehend what he has done to me as a person. And I doubt he ever will, and I don't think it's my responsibility to try and get him to understand that. That's something that you have to come to in your own terms. But what I have learned, and I learned through volunteering as, a prison volunteer, is that I have to accept that he's a hurt person. And because he's a hurt person, he hurt me. And that's where I can forgive him. Is that I can understand that he is in pain. I don't have to accept what he's doing, but I can forgive him for the things that he's done to take away my value as a person.
In the financial abuse that you experienced, how did you leave the marriage and financially support yourself?
I was not really allowed to work. The marriage that I was in was very controlling. It was very manipulative. I have 2 boys and they were both younger. My youngest is special needs. There was just no way that I would have been able to survive the ramifications of having outside employment while I was a stay-at-home mom. There was definitely a control issue there where if I left the house to work, when I got home, there would have been a certain amount of punishment for inconveniencing my ex. So there was no employment history when I left. And it's very difficult to describe what that feels like, being female and trying to go back into the workforce and not having work history. I mean, I was in my late 30s, and the last time I had really worked a paycheck job, I think I was 21. And I had kept up with my technology skills and everything. And I'm thinking, I've raised these 2 children under very difficult circumstances. I've been in and out of OT and speech therapy with my younger son. I felt like I was very competent and capable. And, you think when you start putting a resume together and you put these skill sets in there that somebody will see value in that and see that this is a person that can be trained to work, in a minimum wage job kind of scenario. And what I found is that that was not the case. You start applying for any kind of job. And I mean, when I say I applied for absolutely everything I could find. I was willing to crawl up inside of, a big rig trailer and pull stuff out third shift to stock shelves at, big box companies. Being turned down in situations like that was humiliating. It was really hard. And so I found a job to cover a small amount of expenses. And it was a part-time job at a place that my mom had worked as a part-time employee as well. And it was a little bit of something, but it was not nearly enough. And unfortunately, that business decided to close down. So I was back at square one and knew I would have to go through the same process all over again. Because I think I had only been there for, I want to say, like 6 months or so, before the business decided to close down. So I knew that I would be put in the same kind of situation again. I wouldn't have even a full year of employment history under my belt at that company. It was really a feast or famine situation.
As somebody who's been in the welfare system, what is your experience of that system and its structure?
I had 2 boys that I needed to provide for, and not many options. I was already in the welfare system, which is very hard. It's designed to keep you there. It is not designed to help give you a leg up. For one, healthcare is incredibly expensive. So when you have Medicaid for your children, especially if you have a child who's special needs and they need specialized therapy, there is no way to buy insurance that will allow you to pay the copays, the medication, all of the services that you need without the monthly cost being, honestly, it was more than the mortgage on the house that I owned. There was just no way. So the alternative to that is you have to only make so much money a year. You have to keep yourself below the poverty line so that you qualify for Medicaid. And that's hard because below the poverty line is nothing. I believe it's under $12,000 a year in North Carolina. So I had to keep myself in that tax bracket just so I could provide healthcare services for my children, for both of them. And that's not a lot of money. And then you don't have the money to pay, for groceries. So you're paying for your basic necessities and your gas. But there's nothing left. So then all of a sudden you're on food stamps, which is, there's a calculator, but it's really on a case by case, situation. You're working with a caseworker who's looking at your employment. There's a lot of play with food stamps. You can make a small increase in wages, and they can cut it by half, which is what happened when I was working my part-time job. I think I want to say it was only like a 75-cent increase. And I was working around 20 hours, and they just about cut my food stamps in half because of that. Because employers have to report the wage change, which was devastating because what you're getting initially it's never enough to cover a month's worth of food. So it really is not set up in a way that you can get a handle on things or find reasonable employment, that covers your bills. You have to kind of stay below this threshold. There's no bridge between there and, being financially stable. Being kind of in that lower middle class tax bracket. It's a struggle. It's a huge step over, to get from, being a part of the welfare system to being self-sustaining and paying all your own bills and paying for groceries and gas and things like that. So it's very, I was not really, let's say it's just messed up. The people who obviously designed that system have never been a part of it, and don't understand how complicated it really is. And that's a situation I've tried to describe to people. I think a lot of times people feel they're maybe under financial stress when they can't buy their Starbucks coffee, or they can't take that vacation that they need to take during the year. Well, financial stress for me was paying cash for everything and being excited that at the end of the week, I had enough change to take my boys to McDonald's to get $1 ice cream cone, getting food stamps for the first time, and going grocery shopping while the boys were at school and picking them up and having them come home and opening up the cabinets and seeing a reaction that is as similar as I've seen children react when they find out that they're going to Disney, that there is now food in the cabinet. And I remember my younger son being so excited that there were 2 different kinds of cereal. That is something so challenging and so devastating and embarrassing, that I don't think anybody ever needs to go through. And there needs to be some massive welfare reform that needs to happen for people who are in situations like that.
While still in your marriage with limited resources, how did your passion for jewelry making reveal itself? And how did that evolve into a business?
It was all by accident, for sure. My dad, so I was really only kind of allowed to go to certain places. And one of those places was my parents' house. So I would take the boys over to visit with my parents and Carrie probably 2 or 3 times a week. And my dad is just incredible. I refer to him as a genius, a mechanical genius. He can fix anything. He can figure out anything. Even at 78, I feel like he's running circles around me. He bought a CO2 laser when the technology was still fairly new, and he must have begged me for about 5 years to go out and look at it and play with it until finally I was like, okay, fine. I'll go out to the shop with you and I'll see what this is. And when I started spending time out in the shop, for one, it was an incredible experience to hang out with my dad and outside of the family unit. The dynamics are a little bit different. You go out in the shop and it was kind of like hanging around with your best friend. The language was different and the atmosphere was different. And so I realized that there might be something that I could do with this. And that's really what he wanted. He wanted me to find something to do because he knew I was just staying at home. Obviously, they didn't know the ins and outs of everything that was happening at home. Really initially started out wanting to engrave on glassware. That's a relatively inexpensive avenue to go down. You can go to a store and buy cheap glasses and engrave on them. And that did not work out well at all. I realized very quickly I was competing against big companies who could offer a much lower price, and happened to meet a woman. I don't even know where we met, but she asked if I could engrave on leather. I don't know. Let me go try it out. And that's really what started the whole thing. I started making jewelry for her and then started researching, doing my own work, figuring out a leather design process. My dad taught me CorelDRAW, which is a graphic design software. I kind of got the basics from him and then self-taught everything else. So that's really how that started. And fortunately for me, it started 8 years before I launched my business, the dabbling in that. Because, when I talk to other business owners, we have that knee-jerk reaction of that, things need to happen right now. I've got this idea and it needs to work immediately. And most businesses are not. When, a lot of the people that I have in the gift shop, it's taken them a decade to fine-tune the product. So I was fortunate in that respect, that I could go somewhere that was a safe space multiple times a week and experiment and figure out what worked and what didn't work and sell a little bit on the side and really kind of hone that craft of using technology and traditional craftsmanship, learning how to dye leather appropriately so that it's not splotchy or streaky. That took me at least a year to figure that out. So there was a good amount of space to kind of get everything together so that I could launch with a really well-formed product when I did. I had really spent most of my time trying to sell jewelry at the Raleigh flea market, which I made some amazing connections there. And it was not where I wanted to be, but it was a starting point. Actually met the friend of my first wholesale customer at the Raleigh flea market, which totally happenstance and incredible situation. When I got my first wholesale customer, that's when I knew that I needed to build a website, really start a social media campaign and polish it up to make it look like a business, that this no longer was going to be just kind of like a side gig, that it needed to be presented as a well thought out idea. And so that's really what I did to the best of my ability. I couldn't hire a web developer, anybody to handle social media, no consultants to kind of help me figure out how to polish up my brand name or anything like that. So I did the best that I could, and really put it out there in August, of 2018. And then it was, the foot to the sidewalk to find more wholesale customers, because that first one was the one that did it. Well, okay, I can do this. So now I need to go out and get some no's and get some yeses, and start working on building a business, a legitimate business. I think a lot of people start a business because they feel compelled to. I started a business because I didn't have a choice. I had developed a skill by chance, working with my dad. And I saw an opportunity for it to become something that could bring in money. And I was desperate. Whatever I could do to even bring in, $10 to put gas in the car, I was going to figure out a way to do it. So developing a business for me had a totally different starting point. And it was still very intimidating and very scary. I still didn't want to be rejected, because I was in the process of doing some major healing. And I also knew too, though, and maybe this is where there was the silver lining in starting a business, is that I knew I had been as far down as you could possibly be. And I was able to survive in that space. So if I had to really struggle and survive again, I knew I could do it. And I knew I could do it because I would be doing it on my own terms and in my own way, and with the ability to ask for help, which I was not able to do before. It's so complex, starting that business for me, all of the emotions. I don't even know if I've really sat down and taken the time to verbalize what that experience was like, because it was very fear-based, because I needed to make it work, because I needed to bring in money. But at the same time, I also utilized it as a healing space, because I was doing creative work. And the designs that even though they're just earring and bracelet designs, they were designs that came from my head. And, when you think about art and somebody taking something that's in their head and in their soul, and they're putting it out in the world, other people are seeing these things and responding to them positively. In a way, it was being validated. It was being seen. And so as fearful as I was about starting a business, and knowing that I had a long road to go as far as personal recovery, it was also a very beautiful experience. It was the first time I felt like I had been seen for anybody in over a decade. That was a big driver for me to find success in any way possible. So between the validation and the creative part and being seen and being heard and being respected, that kind of alongside of that fear component, oh my gosh, I have got to think for things. I think both of those are what really pushed me forward, and the two things that I really had to address as a business owner. So it wasn't till recently that I had to, with the gift shop, I'll say, with the gift shop, I feel like I went through the normal kind of new business pains that people go through.
At what point were you able to break out of the welfare system and be dependent on the business you created?
Almost at the year mark from starting my own business. Gosh, what an incredible feeling it was to not have to have food stamps or depend on that for security, food security. I was lucky at the very beginning to acquire some wholesale customers who, as female business owners, were very interested in being mentors. They gave me some very well honed in advice which probably put me a good 2 years ahead of schedule. Because all of a sudden I didn't have that learning curve. And so I went from having 2 wholesale businesses purchasing my jewelry on a regular basis to 12, probably about a 6-month time frame. I also had people who were able to help me with the whole supply chain and working directly with distributors. So I hit that sweet spot a lot sooner. In business, there's this kind of gray area, and I'm kind of in that with the gift shop now. And so I'm being very patient because I know what it is. You're in this kind of weird spot where you can't quite shift over to being more streamlined and more productive because financially you don't have the means to do it just yet. So when I got to that point with the jewelry business, I had the right people at the right time hook me up directly with distributors. So all of a sudden, my costs for production went way, way down. Then I saw a much bigger profit return. The money shift for that was incredible. I was being much more efficient. Production was much easier, much simpler, much more cost effective. I was able to keep more money, which was great. And so that's kind of when I was able to, drop off, having to use food stamps and doing my 4:00 Walmart grocery shopping because I was too embarrassed to use my EBT card during the day. Because if something goes wrong, they're on the intercom, letting somebody know so everybody can hear. That was really amazing. I had to keep Medicaid for a little bit, just because, financially I was still at that threshold, for a little while, but, so there's Medicaid and then there's Health Choice. So, I was able to afford a small copay and still have state insurance and my child could get services. But, it was nice. There was one point where I looked at all of my sales for maybe like 3 months and realized that I had made probably as much in those 3 months as I had ever made in my entire working career. Wow. And that's an incredible thing. It's on your own. It was on my own. It wasn't through a business. So that was incredible.
There were specific moments of my evolution and healing and as a person that led me to create the travel blog that I have now. What led you to decide to open the Selkie?
I was about to get some major accounts, wholesale accounts, and COVID hit. Everything shut down. Me and every other musician, artist, restaurant owner, all just kind of sat back and watched everything fall apart. I have talked about this with other individuals. I realized very quickly that I had made a huge error in how I started my jewelry business. I had not made the business connections and done the networking that I needed to do to create a way to keep my business going through COVID. I just didn't have that. And I had worked so hard to try and get everything right that when something happened and I realized that I had made a major mistake, it was hard. I mean, there are still businesses that are closing because of COVID-related issues. So I moved to Wilson with my now husband, and it was, in all honesty, it was a very reluctant move. My safety network was in the Piedmont region of North Carolina. My family's there. There was a point where I knew I needed to start pulling in income. There are 4 boys now in the home, and that's a lot of mouths to feed. And, just solely relying on one income is just not practical. It's not something that can be done. I started the process of applying for jobs again and really was in the same situation all over again because I was self-employed. In self-employment, you're pretty much kind of in that same bracket as somebody who has no history of employment. Companies don't really know exactly how to deal with that. Was in the process of being interviewed for one job, and I feel confident that I would have gotten it, but it was the exact opposite of it was the exact opposite of everything I was trying to become and what I felt like I had been working to become. It was a really awful moment to be standing there, in the store and, God, I just can't do this. I cannot go to work and work 8-hour days, 5-6 days a week, but know on the back end what it feels like to put that amount of work and love into something that is totally mine. I think that was probably the biggest breaking point for me. I think I kept myself together for the most part. I went home and I cried, I can't do this. I can't work for a company. That's when I started thinking about all of the other artisans and craftspeople that I knew that were in the same situation. Let me make the best of this situation. I'm in a new area. There's this wonderful, iconic art park in historic downtown Wilson that is really starting to change the whole dynamic of the downtown area. So I have a choice. I can become a part of it, or I can kind of get swallowed up by this depression again. The other part of having a history that I did, and kind of going hand in hand with learning what simple contentment looks like and forgiveness looks like, is I also learned what resilience can be. So I decided that I may be down on ground floor and I may have been walking around here for a while, but this is where I need to pick back up. And so I decided to go ahead and formulate a business plan for opening up a gift shop and pulling in and networking with all of these other businesses that I love and respect, and finding more businesses to love and respect in this wonderful North Carolina community. And I was very fortunate that all the pieces kind of fell into place. It was the right time. It was one of those, the universe has stepped back and realized that you were in pain and opened the door for you to, and I gladly walked through it. And so that's really what sparked the Selkie. And I also realized that there was a need in this community for a business like mine, where people can have accessibility to art and not feel like they were walking into somewhere where they didn't fit in or didn't belong. That there's no criteria to come into this gift shop. You can have $5 in your pocket, you can have 400, and you can walk out my door equally as happy that you got something that's unique and handmade, and something that you can incorporate into your life, and it can make you happy. And that's all I want. That's the whole goal of this business, is to make art accessible so that people can communicate with each other and not have to know each other. That artists can communicate with the whole Wilson community, the tourists that come into the community, and not have to be present to do that. That I can be a facilitator for that relationship. And it's been incredible.
I feel really compelled as a part of my healing to share my experiences with others. I believe that the more people in the world living authentically and doing what makes them happy can absolutely transform the world. As part of your healing, what are you doing to make bigger impacts on the world and continue to transform your life?
So I'm almost done with an associate's in counseling. And my goal really is to take that associate's degree and roll it over into a 4-year program and get an undergrad in psychology. And right now, as far as a graduate degree, I'd like to really focus on developmental psychology for sure. So it's interesting. I have seen the injustice that comes with being special needs because of my son. Both of my boys as well as myself have had to deal with mental wellness issues. And then, of course, I have domestic abuse background. So I feel like I'm already kind of primed to look at inequity. And being a business owner in a rural North Carolina city, I have noticed a lot of discrepancies in different communities in Wilson. And I would really like to take my education and use it in a way that can take these observations and utilize those observations to really drive programming, whether I'm volunteering at an organization or working on something that I come up with at some point further down the road to make social justice changes. Because when you're retail and you're right in downtown, I am getting the full cross section of the downtown community. Wilson, and this is definitely a very touchy subject for people. I think in part because as a whole, nobody has really taken the time to teach other people how to have these conversations where you can talk about race and inequity in a safe space where there's going to be progress because people are communicating effectively. I think in situations like this, when you start talking about race in Wilson, it makes individuals incredibly uncomfortable. And so then there's a lot of defensiveness and indecisiveness and lack of motivation to deal with issues. When I talk to individuals about like my domestic abuse, I say this, I can be a feminist all day long. I can go to marches. I can speak out against domestic violence. But really where the social structure change is going to come is with men. Men are the ones who allow the social structure to exist, that it is okay to demean and hurt women. If that social structure changed and all of a sudden it was unacceptable to use certain terms, derogatory terms, or to, rape or hit women, if it was outwardly expressed that was just not acceptable behavior, then would we have abuse issues? Institutional change feels impossible, but I think it can be perceived as being impossible because the social change hasn't happened. I almost think you have to have the social change first before there is any kind of acknowledgement of institutionalized oppressive issues. Using that and kind of applying it to historic downtown Wilson, it's not very different than a lot of southern towns. There is a physical and psychological barrier in this town, which is railroad tracks. And so you have the downtown area that is now at the very beginnings of what's probably going to be an incredible economic development boom for this area. And then you have East Wilson, which is your Black and brown community, predominantly. Growing up in Cary and then moving to Holly Springs, I have watched the effects of gentrification and, doing street photography through downtown Raleigh and that southeast side of Raleigh. You start to watch the effects of gentrification, and I have like a full physical reaction to it at this point because I've been able to make personal connections when all of a sudden that a family who has had generations living in the area is getting priced out, getting moved out, and stepping away from an area that they've been in because they can't afford it. That's devastating. I don't even know how to wrap my head around that. I can't. I'm like, I mean, I've had to deal with a multitude of issues, but I can say that I've never had to deal with those issues as a member of the Black, African American, Hispanic, Latino community. I haven't. So I can't imagine walking out of my door every day, having to deal with, the issues that I've had to deal with, being in an at-risk population, and having to do that with the fear that you don't know what's going to happen to you. That's terrifying. And I've had these conversations quite a bit with members of the Black community in Wilson. And as a business owner, I'm invested in this community. This is my community. I'm a representative of this community. So if I don't take the time to address those social justice issues, the inequities in the community, then I'm being a passive racist. That's exactly what I'm doing. I'm allowing it to happen. And I don't know that I could live with myself if I don't at least try to address the issues as best I can without replacing or taking away from the voices in the minority community. So that's definitely something that has pushed me to stay in school and to focus on that degree, because there's a lot of trauma there, and I need to understand the psychological impact and how to best care and help individuals who are dealing with issues like that. We like staying in our safe space. But the reality is, and again, I'll go back to my domestic abuse experience, is that you don't live in a vacuum. Nobody lives in a vacuum. There's an amazing book that was written called No Visible Bruises that talks about why everyone has to care about domestic abuse. Because as a taxpayer, you're paying for the outcomes of domestic abuse. You're involved in it whether you want to be or not. So you might as well care. Institutionalized racism, even at a city government level, and Wilson is, very progressive. I think for such a small town, they've got a better handle on addressing it than larger cities like Raleigh or Durham does, if I'm being honest. I mean, they really are taking time to focus on those kinds of issues. But, as far as the community at large, you have to care because it is going to affect you. Anytime there's any kind of institutionalized oppression, systemic racism, you may feel you're removed from it, but you're not. The effects of it are coming to you in one form or another. So, do you have to get out and speak your mind and raise your voice? And no, of course not. But being fully aware of who you are, what your background is, where you come from, what kind of bias you have towards individuals of color, and knowing yourself, making yourself aware of your actions and what you do and how you interact with others, that's huge. And that's where everything really needs to start, to make progress. And to not just make progress in Wilson, but across the board, everywhere it has to happen.
As you look back on your experience as a whole, sitting here in your own shop today, what advice do you have for someone watching this video that wants to make changes in their life?
The best advice I can give: embrace failure. Wholeheartedly, without judgment, and be okay with failing. Learn the art of failing and resilience, because it is only redirection. That is the biggest thing in business is to not, maybe I should just strip the word failure away. Be okay with redirection. We'll use redirection instead of failure. Because it is an avenue to get yourself to the place that you're trying to go anyway. When you're making a dramatic life change, whether it's a personal one or business, educational direction change, that mindset, that cognitive switch that you just turned on has already put things in motion. You may not actively be doing anything, but your mindset has changed. So how you're interpreting your environment, how you're looking at and engaging your environment is completely different than it was before you had that switch. So you're not ever going to fail, wholly fail, if you keep going in that direction. You will just have to course correct and be okay with course correcting, because it's not ever going to go exactly how you plan for it to go. And just love that part of it. Love that part of changing. Because that's the beautiful part, where you'll meet the right people at the right time, and get the most out of the experience. Don't get caught up in the emotions of feeling like you've let yourself down or let other people down. Embrace it and love it and hold it close, because it's your best friend. Redirection is your best friend.